All right, everybody, thanks for being so patient with us. We do have everyone who we expected to have right now. This is session 5 of Getting Started with Lesson Study, and I want to welcome everybody back this week. We do know that Charlene is not able to join us this afternoon. She's not feeling well. And we do know that Jane and Stephanie are both going to be a little bit late joining us this morning. So we're going to go ahead and get a start, and we will welcome them when we see them come online. Again, just as a reminder, if you'll turn off your webcam and mute your microphone, if you haven't done those things already, if you need to contact us at any time, please type an asterisk into the chat box and we will respond to your question. And again, just to remind you that the session is going to be recorded and is available to view afterward. For those of you who haven't looked at the recordings, one of the things that I do want to make sure that you know is that Latifa goes back and edits the recording. So that long session where that long period when you guys are just discussing your questions based on your learning logs, we actually take that session out. So it does move rather quickly. Our sessions are a little bit less than an hour and 15 minutes in most cases. So that means that the recording of the session is a little bit less than an hour. So again, just so you know, those are always there to go back and look at afterward. And again, this afternoon, we're going to be using a combination of GoToMeeting and Skype. So again, I hope that you all have your Skype-enabled device, whether that is an iPhone or an iPad, ready to use. I am going to now talk about the pairings today, and I apologize if there are some mistakes in this list. So if you could listen carefully, the first pairing is correct. We'll have Mary and Denise. In the second pairing, we're going to have Kate with Julia and Stephanie. The third pairing is correct, Jane and Karen. The fourth pairing is correct, Richard and Nilu. The fifth one, Stephanie and Charlene, if you can just pretend you don't see that one we're not going to do. And finally, Barbara and Amanda will be our fifth pairing. So we'll have 5 groups today instead of 6. As in the other sessions, can I ask if anyone has any questions before we get started today? So these might be questions about the learning logs, questions generally about anything that we've done in the past, or questions about things that might be coming up. Again, if you type an asterisk into the chat box, we will open your microphone if you have any questions before we get started today. All right, Mary, we're going to open your...
Mary, if you'd like to mute your microphone, please. Okay.
Hi, there we go. I seem to be having continuous problems with Skype, I'm afraid. Anytime I try to re-log in, having used it previously, I can't use it. So could you advise how best to contact for the group discussion later?
Okay, Mary.
Jane.
Mary, you're with Jane. Do you use...
Oh, no, sorry, Mary's with Denise, sorry.
Mary with Denise. Do you use other...
Have you got an iPhone, Mary?
Yes, I have.
And
yeah.
Denise, have you got an iPhone?
Denise is not.
Denise, do you want to open your microphone? See if you've both got an iPhone.
I have an iPad, not an iPhone, but it should be the same thing.
If you've both got an iPhone, you could FaceTime.
Yeah, I think that's probably the best way. Yeah.
Or you could use the old-fashioned telephone if you needed to, because you're both right here in London.
Yes.
That's right.
So when it comes time to do the small group discussions, Mary or Denise, if you just want to, if you're going to use FaceTime, just put your contact information into the chat box, or you can put your phone number into the chat box. And again, I know that when you send a chat, you can select either to everyone or Mary. You can by using the drop-down menu just below the chat box, you can send it just to Denise, or Denise, you can send it just to Mary. Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, Jane's here now too.
All right. So Jane has joined us at this point. We're just waiting for Stephanie, who will join in progress, and Stephanie is just stuck in traffic on her way home from work, so we expect that she will be here shortly.
Jane, welcome, Jane. You're paired with Karen Hirschlip today, but we'll go through the pairings as we get closer to the task. Thank you. Okay.
All right, just as in all of our past sessions, we're going to open this session with a really quick video, and it's going to be looking at this question, how will I plan my research lesson? So again, we're going to show you just a really quick video that kind of summarizes the content that you saw in the reading this week.
Hello, and welcome to the 5th of 8 sessions designed to help you build the knowledge, understanding, and skills you will need to engage in lesson study. I'm Ben Wren, the head of the Center for Inspiring Minds. This short video will introduce you to the research lesson planning process. It will undoubtedly draw on curriculum and lesson planning practices that are familiar to you, as well as practices that may be new or familiar practices that may be approached differently because of the collaborative nature of lesson study. By definition, your lesson study team is made up of a group of practitioners who share a common concern or problem about learning or student performance. But the exact nature of the relationships among your lesson study team members will shape the nature of your collaboration. If the members of your team all teach the same lessons to students in the same grade, your team may co-develop the research lesson, and each person would be equally qualified to teach the research lesson. However, if the members of your team teach different courses within the same subject area or grade level, one person may draft the research lesson and solicit feedback from the other team members. In this case, the teacher who drafted the lesson would also teach the research lesson. There is no one way to approach this professional collaboration, but it's important to recognize the kind of support and involvement you are looking for from your fellow team members. What makes your team a team is a shared interest, concern, or problem. To identify this, you may need to ask the following questions. What topics are persistently difficult for or disliked by students? What topics do teachers find most difficult to teach? Are there topics I need to teach where I know the range of students' prior knowledge is extremely wide? Are there new curricula, frameworks, or standards that teachers want to understand and master? As we discussed in previous sessions, an examination of student work, performance assessment, and test data is an excellent starting point in identifying the focus of the research lessons. An examination of the possible instructional methods and educational resources is also part of this iterative planning process. Some lesson study teams begin by teaching a lesson that is not as carefully crafted as the envisioned research lesson, but that enables the teachers to gain information about student thinking that can be used to plan the research lesson. This may reveal important information about student strengths, weaknesses, or interests. When it comes to planning the research lesson, most teachers will use the method that has been selected by their campus or division level academic leader. In some cases, this will be Understanding by Design. Understanding by Design, or UBD, was developed by Jay McTighe and Grant Wiggins in 2005. It uses backward design, which refers to the practice of starting with the end in mind, the learning goals, and how they will be assessed. UBD is a 3-stage planning process. In brief, Stage 1 involves identifying the desired results. Stage 2 involves selecting the assessment type, and Stage 3 involves planning the learning experiences and instruction. UBD is well suited to lesson study as they both focus on learner outcomes and the learning arising from a lesson or unit. Implied in the use of UBD is the identification and use of standards, which provide structure and accountability and guide learning progress. Standards are unique to each subject, or may be transdisciplinary in the case of applied learning courses, like personal, social, and health education or service learning. ACS International Schools has identified a range of assessment methods typically used to measure learners' progress against standards. We also recognize that not all learners learn in the same way or at the same pace. To accommodate learning differences, we use differentiation to adapt lessons and activities to meet the needs of our diverse learners. Lesson study research lessons benefit from the use of instructional methods and activities that make thinking and learning visible. After all, if the learning is not visible, it cannot be observed and recorded by the research lesson observers. One example of a visible thinking activity is student-to-student dialogue. These techniques offer opportunities to observe expressions of engagement, enjoyment, understanding, complex thinking, and the use of academic language, among other possible learning outcomes. ACS International Schools is fortunate to have a rich teaching resource for student-to-student dialogue called Talking in Class. Talking in Class resources include a free iBook by the same name and face-to-face workshops, which are offered regularly to ACS teachers. Another visible thinking method that has been developed by Harvard's Project Zero is visible thinking. Visible thinking routines are simple and memorable thinking techniques that build thinking dispositions which students can use in a range of learning situations and settings. Again, ACS International Schools is fortunate to have a group of teachers who have participated in Project Zero training and who are available to share their experience and expertise. In addition, Project Zero instructional methods are the focus of regular professional development workshops. In the next session, we will be introducing a range of observation data collection tools and student interview techniques that can be used by research lesson observers to collect evidence of student learning. Thank you for your continued interest in lesson study.
All right, in that brief video, there was a bit of a recap of some of the information and content that we've covered in earlier sessions, as well as the new information about actually planning the research lesson. Before we go into the learning log work that you did this week, I was wondering if anyone has any questions or comments at this point. And again, if you just type an asterisk into the chat box, we will open your microphone. If there are no questions or comments this time, let's move directly into the first activity. And again, these are going to be Skype paired conversations. And again, this list is not entirely accurate, so let me go through the Skype pairings one more time. We have Mary and Denise, who are going to be using a method other than Skype to have their conversation. And again, you guys can figure that out and communicate using the chat box. We have Kate, Julia, and Stephanie. And again, we're assuming that Kate and Julia are in the same room, and they'll be Skyping with Stephanie, who is in Doha. Stephanie has not come online.
Kate, Julia, and Stephanie.
Say it again.
Kate, Julia, and Stephanie. Oh, Stephanie hasn't come online.
Yes, Stephanie hasn't come online yet, Kate and Julia. So I'm going to ask that you start this first conversation with the two of you there. And then we have Jane and Karen, Richard and Nilu, and Barbara and Amanda. Are there any questions about the pairings? And again, I apologize for this slide. We've had some changes in people being here. All right, let me show you the questions for the first session. And in this first session, I want you to refer to Learning Log 5.1. And 5.1 was the learning log that you used to record your Connect, Extend, Challenge responses to the videos and the reading that you did in preparation for today. So again, in your discussions, I want you to talk about the things that you saw in those videos and in the reading. How do they connect to your prior knowledge and practice? How do they extend your thinking or practice? And how do they challenge your thinking or practice? So what new questions do they raise for you? You're going to have 15 minutes for this first paired discussion. We will change the screen when there are 2 minutes remaining, and then we will call you back to the screen. And we are going to ask people to just kind of give us a bit of feedback, just to kind of report some of the things that you talked about in your group. So I'm letting you know that in preparation, so someone might actually think about who would be the person who's going to come online and share the learning that you have done. So if you want to go ahead, please, and switch over now to your second devices. And again, you have 15 minutes. We'll let you know when there are 2 minutes remaining. All right, everybody. I'd like to welcome everybody back. I hope that you enjoyed your paired conversations about those questions. We are going to go through the questions one at a time, and I'm going to ask you to volunteer to share what you talked about in your paired discussion. And The way that I'd like you to do that is to use the asterisk as kind of a raise your hand tool, and we will open your microphone and ask you to do the same in just a moment. So the first question that we're looking at is, how did the practices or ideas, the things that you read about, the things that you saw in the videos, how did they connect to your prior knowledge and practice? And again, I'd like you to please share some of the things that you talked about in your paired discussion. To indicate that you'd like to share, please just put an asterisk into the box and we will unmute your microphone. How do those ideas connect? Jane,
Okay.
We're opening up.
Jane, if you'd like to unmute your microphone, please. Just need to do yourself. Okay, go ahead, Jane.
Hi there. I thought it was very interesting that it was. I was reminded the lesson study planning reminded me of how a KWL approach, really, it's almost a mirror image of what a good lesson plan is like. So it's teachers modeling lesson planning again. It's hard to explain it. It's sort of like a lesson plan within a lesson plan.
Mm.
So it's looking at how we can connect what we already have observed to instruction that will result in what we want to see as an outcome for our students. So yeah, that's, I think I won't rabbit on anymore.
Yeah. I really like that analogy, so that the teacher is almost doing a KWL about her students and about the class, and then using that to produce the lesson plan, which is really, what do the students know, what do they want to know, how are they going to learn it? Yeah, great, thank you for that.
Okay.
We're going to go to Kate next.
Go to Kate next, yeah.
So Kate, if you would like to unmute your microphone.
Okay.
Sorry, we haven't really got anything to add to that. Connect. Oh, hang on, no, we do.
Talk about 78.
Oh, no, that's further down.
All right. Okay.
No, not that bit. It's the next bit. Sorry.
Okay, no
I
worries.
hit my
Thank you. Okay, we're going to go to Nilu now. Nilu, if you'd like to unmute your microphone, please.
Hello.
Okay.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, KWL is a fantastic tool to do it, but I think for the lesson study, it's very important to know what are my performance expectations while I'm teaching this particular unit. So, so I think that's a whole thing to be observed, and it should be very clear what am I expecting from the students, and have I looked into it that is it a difficult topic? Why do the students find it difficult? Can it be, or is it something, a topic which is disliked by the students? How should I actually work through it? Yeah, and maybe asking them to sit in small groups and share everything, what they know about the topic under study. And the most important thing is to set a time limit. I think timing is very important, so that when each group finishes, they should be sharing it with the rest of the class.
Great, thank you, Nilu. And I think that's an important thing here. And when we're talking about planning a research lesson, we shouldn't just assume that it's a completely different approach than what we've been doing in our regular good practice. And Nilu mentioned there at the very beginning this idea of performance and performance standards. And of course, what you're doing in the lesson study, you want it to be visible. So you want the students to be actively doing something that the observers can observe. But before the lesson study, one of the things that you may have done is you may have negotiated performance standards with the students. In other words, you may have agreed a rubric to define what represents different levels of practice of the task that you're asking them to do. Nilu's point about student groupings, also a really important thing to think about, especially important in the lesson study. If you are going to be asking an observer to watch students who are engaged in collaborative practice, because they're watching the individual, you have to think very carefully about what you want them to be watching that individual for, because you then have kind of two different levels of things you could look at. You could look at their involvement as a collaborator, but you could also look at their expression of learning for whatever the content is. So groupings are a really important thing, and sometimes they can make the learning richer, but sometimes they can make the observation a little bit more challenging. Thank you for that. We're going to, would anyone else like to contribute to how what you looked at connected to your prior knowledge or practice? All right, we're going to change the question a bit. And this time, I would like to know if you talked about ways that the practices or ideas extend your thinking or practice. So how did they kind of take where you were and move you on just a little bit further, maybe challenge you just a little bit?
Okay, Kate, if you'd like to unmute your microphone. Okay, go ahead.
We talked about the fact that the bit about points to notice in your lesson planning, so actually highlighting things within your lesson plan to then pass on, I guess, to then be data that could be collected. That was something I wouldn't normally include in a lesson plan, whereas most of the rest would have been. So that was interesting and kind of extended what we already do. And we also talked about the fact that the new NGSS standards really force you to do this kind of thinking and practice. And I was really, when I read about the single data collection for each observer, so each one's looking at something slightly different, that's quite a lot of extra planning to plan exactly who's going to look at what and what evidence.
Yep. Kate, thank you for that. I think that your observation of the points to notice is a really good one, because what lesson study does challenge you to do is that it really says, what are your assumptions about the learning that's going to take place? So based on what you know about your class and what you know about a particular instructional method, what are you assuming is going to happen? Because those then become the points of things to notice. The idea of collecting data through focal observations of individual students, again, is very different than other ways that you may have approached lesson observation or lesson planning, to actually plan for concrete things that an observer can come in and see that provide evidence of learning. It is certainly something that goes beyond, I think, probably the routine lesson planning. Does anyone else want to? Denise.
Okay, Denise, if you'd like to unmute your microphone, please. Okay, go ahead.
Yes, I just wanted to say one of the things I liked from the reading was that it said to, in a way that suggested that teachers should plan their lessons or use them twice, once with imaginary students, and I really like that because it extended my thinking when planning to try to think about that. You know, what are the issues that will come up, the dynamic, the questions from the students, how will they take in the instructions, how are they likely to respond to them. So that little, even though it seems very insignificant, that extra planning with these imaginary students, I think, in addition to the, you know, database planning or consulting with other teachers, will obviously make you create better lesson plans.
Great, Denise. Thank you for that. And again, to connect what Denise just said to one of the pieces that I tried to highlight in that short video, that one of the other things, so you can pre-plan your lesson and do this imaginary lesson in your head, imagining how students are going to react. Another more concrete strategy is to do something that a lot of you probably call a dirty lesson, and that is to take what you think you're going to do in the research lesson and do a kind of a less developed form of that lesson to actually see how students react to that as a way to further develop the research lesson to address student learning differences or other things that may arise by doing that kind of first, almost like a pilot or a test lesson. So yeah, both great strategies for developing a really effective research lesson that will you'll be able to learn the most from. Barbara, if you go ahead and unmute your microphone, please.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So just in sort of maybe contradiction to what you've just said now, you know, I find it hard to plan a lesson. Those ladies sitting around the table, those teachers, looked like they were planning from a book. You know, I mean, how many minutes are you going to spend on that? How many minutes are you going to spend on that? That's not how I work or how I teach. And there was another reading where they talk about how, for me, the lessons are almost organic. I can't think about what questions exactly I'm going to ask or what answers I'm going to get until I'm actually teaching the lesson. you know, so I struggled a little bit with that because I could think, I know what I'm going to teach, I know what the objective is, and I know what they need to know, but it depends on the class, it depends on the students, how it happens. You know, so that I found a bit difficult.
Yeah. Yeah, no, Barbara, I know exactly what you're saying, that in our different schools, we have very, very different approaches to lesson planning. And one of the things that the research lesson does really challenge you to do is certainly, I think in all cases, no matter what level of lesson planning you do, it challenges to do that lesson planning in a much more focused and detailed way than you may typically do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the other things to keep in mind is that there is no right way or wrong way to do this. And what we were trying to show you were some different examples. And certainly one of the things that you recognized in that school is that they have a set curriculum. They have a curriculum that everyone delivers. There are 5 or 4 different teachers at that grade level. They all teach the same lesson. They may teach it slightly differently, but they all teach the same lesson, essentially. And again, that will be very different from the way that most of our schools at ACS operate.
Yeah, you know, I mean, with Charlene, Stephanie, and I are working on the same goal, and I think the 3 of us are hugely different teachers. You know, so even if they watched me deliver a lesson, or not watch me, but watch the kids the way I deliver a writing lesson, would probably not be Stephanie's way or Charlene's way. And I think that makes for interesting dialogue, yeah. I must say, you know, yeah.
And again, we always want to keep focused on the real purpose of lesson study, and that is to actually, what you're trying to do as the person who's designing the research lesson is to plan something so that some aspect of learning is going to be visible enough that the people who you invite in can observe it, because they're not watching your lesson, they're not critiquing your lesson. What they're looking for is, can they actually observe the learning that you are trying to encourage or develop through the teaching methods that you've picked and the resources that you're using.
What are the logistics of those lessons at Hillingdon and Egerman Cobham? I mean, you know, how are we going to get time to, because I know you've said that we don't have to do this, we don't have to really do this, but Charlene, Stephanie, and I are doing this as part of our TPS, as our growth phase. So, will we be given time to observe each other? Can we ask for time?
Yeah. So that's something I'm going to talk about that a little bit in session 7 and 8. But one of the things that we are certainly here to do as SIM is to help you negotiate for that time, because using lesson study as your professional growth method is something that has been recognized by the school across the campuses. And you guys are going to be the pioneers. You're the first group to do it. And we really plan to be your advocates. So, wherever you encounter challenges, that's what we're here for, is to help you iron those things out and help you, make your experience as successful as it can possibly be. We'll talk about that a little bit in session 7, but certainly in session 8. Okay.
Thank you, Ben.
Yeah, we have one more question before we move on to our. Oh, Mary. I'm sorry.
Go to Nilu first.
Nilu, we're going to open your microphone.
Okay, go ahead, Nilu.
Yeah, I was just listening to Barbara, and I was thinking about, it would be good, like in our subject, we normally give something, an introduction, like a reading to the students or illustrations, just to get to know that what prior knowledge they have, and when they come to the class, we can ask questions. I know in a real world, this would be the best deal to do, but at some time when you're teaching, you have to make sure that the content is completed, so we don't really look into that. But I think this technique, I was watching some videos and reading some articles which you had posted, it did recommend that it's very good if you give student reading some illustrations, or and then come back and ask them questions, summarize it before you plan your lesson.
Yeah. Great, thank you for that, Mary. That's a great strategy. I'm sorry, Nilu, that's a great strategy.
We're going to Mary now.
I'm sorry, now we're going to Mary.
Mary, if you'd like to unmute it. Okay, go ahead, please.
Hi. I just have a quick question about the idea of setting a practice lesson and then a target lesson, that how there seems to be a good distinction there in terms of the target you might want to get out of the original planned lesson for the lesson study and how far your practice lesson achieves that target. The concern that I'm thinking of is if you're teaching a highly mixed ability class where you need to set a pace for your target lesson to match the learning outcomes you intend to get, and this pace needs to match everybody's learning ability in that class. By covering some of the targets in a practice lesson, how much does that necessarily take from the original target, or does it need to be redesigned to account for a new target based on the outcome of the practice lesson?
Right,
that's the first question I have based on lesson planning. Yeah.
So can I do that one first, Mary? That is a really important question. And next week we are going to talk a little bit more about the actual observation process and the information that you would need to give to those observers before they can do that observation. And one of them is context, the background information. So if you've done a practice lesson ahead of the research lesson, there is nothing wrong with that. You just need to take that into account when you look at the learning that arises then from the research lesson. And the observers need to know that you did a practice lesson or a dirty lesson or whatever you call that in preparation. As long as you account for it, it's something that you can work around in terms of understanding the learning that comes from that particular method. Yeah. And in fact, you might actually ask,
practice lesson.
Yeah, you might actually ask, again, next week we're going to talk a little bit about exit surveys and things like that. And you may actually ask some questions in your exit survey, to what extent did the other lesson help you prepare for today, to get feedback from the students in terms of, if they actually saw that by doing the practice lesson, what they did in the research lesson was accessible to a bigger group.
Mm-hmm. I think the practice lesson would really help in that sense, but I totally understand the idea of teaching something new as a research lesson to a group of students where lesson planning has to account for a different pace and development than you might anticipate beforehand. I think just the opposite side of that is by setting the practice lesson, you're already giving the lower ability students a head start on where you're going with the target lesson. Yep. So by the time you get to the target lesson, everyone is at the same level of ability, which is going to skew your outcome results.
Yeah, but again, following the target lesson, you'll have the observations of those focal students, and you'll also have short interviews at the end, and you'll be looking for students to report the extent to which that previous experience enabled them to perform in that particular research lesson, the way that they did. So,
okay.
Yeah, there are always going to be those factors. I mean, students are always going to have prior knowledge. I mean, it would be very unusual to teach a research lesson that was introducing things that were completely new and that you've controlled for all of those things to understand the effect of a particular instructional method. So, okay. Yeah, teaching is a really messy endeavor, and as long as you account for all of those things and understand that those are all variables that have influenced the outcome, that's really the best that you can do.
Okay, thank you for that.
Yeah, thanks, Mary. We are going to go on to the final question in the series, which was, how did the things that you looked at or learned about challenge your thinking or practice? And here specifically, it would be interesting to see if you have new questions that have come out. We've already touched on some of those questions in the extend bit, but are there other questions that the reading or the videos raised for you about lesson study, or just generally this idea of learning about the effectiveness of your chosen instructional methods in terms of the learning that it allows or facilitates? And again, if you'll just put an asterisk in the box, we're going to go to Jane first and then to Nilu.
Okay, Jane, go ahead.
Hi, thanks. Looking at two things that cropped up for me. One of them was, it was just very interesting, being sort of the NLE program where our tutors go ahead and do their thing, and we don't have a sort of particular curriculum and all the rest of it. Looking at writing lesson plans, we've never
insisted that they write lesson plans and show them to us anyway. And the very fact that by writing you can organize your ideas in the way that the Japanese do, that's why we ask our students to write. So by the same token, that's why it's important for teachers to write. And I think that, so that was one thing I took away from it, that challenged the way that we do things, and we haven't asked them to do that before, so that might be something that we need to include. But the bigger question for me was looking at those concentric circles of the lesson study, the focus being the lesson study itself, the lesson plan, then how it relates to the unit plan and how that relates to the research theme. Of course, again, in our situation, it had me questioning, is it even valid that we do lesson study, because we don't have that unit plan to go to and those standards, and we don't have everything else in place as well. But the key then came for me in the reading in the second article, where they talked about a middle school group of teachers in a mixed subject group doing a lesson study. And it was, the article mentioned about the learning that was achieved by the middle school teachers about the way that they plan. And I think no matter when you do, and this is for those of us who run programs where we don't have a bought-in or a set curriculum or standards to adhere to, it could made us feel, first of all, perhaps that we were less able or less right to do a lesson study because we don't have those things. But the fact that it changes teacher thinking about lesson planning is already an outcome that would have them think already about, well, we don't have a curriculum, maybe we should put one in place. So as a starting point for those sort of programs, I think it had a lot of value. So it turned my thinking around on that one as well. Okay.
Jane, thank you for that.
Yep.
We're going to go to Nilu first, or next. Go ahead, Nilu.
Yeah, I have a question. I was watching those videos and reading some articles which you had posted. They were very interesting. And I was thinking about, it did talk about something, thinking routines. Teach students the concept of thinking, to see, think, and wonder. And I went back and started thinking, I'm teaching my grade 11s and 12s. It's a very difficult skill to develop the habit of thinking, so that they can make some connection, generate some explanation. And I don't know, is there something to be added here so that we have a workshop on it, or maybe some more articles to read on how to develop thinking skills in high school or something like that? Is it possible?
It is possible. Certainly, Project Zero as a project does hold several kind of big conferences every year where they provide those opportunities outside our school. We do have a Project Zero team, an interest group within ACS now, and that group is just beginning to plan how it might offer some of those professional development opportunities based on the experiences that they've had at the Project Zero Teacher Institute. A number of people went away for a week this past summer to Harvard and did some really in-depth thinking around thinking routines and visible thinking and some of the other Project Zero methodologies. In your school, Nilu, one of the people who I would highly recommend you talk to is Amanda, who's actually on the course with us this evening, and Jed Petzinger. Jed was one of the people who went to Project Zero with us this past summer, and he may really have some really kind of excellent resources that he can point you toward, things that he would have used in that course. Yeah.
So because I have what I understand, sorry to interrupt you, but I think this is a skill which has to be developed quite early in a student's life, not at the when they're like 16 plus. It has to be developed pretty early. So there has to be a place in our curriculum development or somewhere where we actually develop these thinking skills in our students.
Yeah. Thank you. No, I think that that's right. Yeah.
There's a message.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, Nilu.
Thank you, Nilu. You want to read it?
Yeah, so there's a message from Julia saying, we are interested that back in 1999, 78% of teachers started with the content and only, sorry, someone's just put a message, and only 22% started with objectives. And we wondered what that percentage would be now. We felt that the science standards are a good vehicle to make sure you do the letter. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Yeah. Julia, and certainly the attention that our school has given to understanding by design and backward design. I know that some of our schools in Rubicon, that their templates are actually built on the UBD framework, and so that they do, start with the standards, start with the learning that we hope to draw out of those standards, and then work toward the activities that will deliver the evidence of that learning. So yeah, UBD is very much in line with the kind of planning that's needed in order to plan a research lesson where you hope to observe learning. Nilu, we're opening up your microphone.
Okay, go ahead, Nilu.
Yeah, I'm coming back to the standards. We're actually going backward. We should have to have the standard, because I've just been on a workshop, and we need to first develop our DCIs. We have to develop our performance expectations, and standard comes very much at the end. Yeah. So I think we should first develop our performance expectations, and then look at the cross-cutting concept, and then see what standards we are trying to expect the student to achieve at the end of the grade or at the end of the grade band.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's important to distinguish between content standards and performance standards. And when we adopt standards, most of the standards that we're adopting are content standards. Some of them have performance standards built in. Some of them actually rely on the teacher to develop those performance standards. So thank you for that, for making that important point. Okay, we are going to move on to our second paired discussion for this evening. And for this one, Stephanie has joined us now. So we are going to, again, let me just go through the pairing. So it will be Mary and Denise again. And this time, Kate and Julia, we're asking that you connect with Stephanie in Doha. And Jane and Karen, Richard and Nilu, Barbara and Amanda, as before. For this next session, what we would like you to do is use your responses to Learning Log 5.2. And the 3 questions that are here actually come from the bottom of the Learning Log. And I want you to focus on how you might manage the development of the research lesson as a collaborative process. And again, here I want you to keep in mind what your relationship might be with the other people in your lesson study team. If you all teach different subjects and all teach them in different ways, do keep in mind that you're going to approach the development of that lesson in a very different way from a group of teachers who all teach the same subject to the same grade. The second question, what challenges do you anticipate of that collaborative process, and how do you think you might address them? A slightly shorter amount of time for this one, about 10 minutes. When we come back, we're going to use our round robin format. We'll go through each person, give each person an opportunity to respond or to pass if you don't care to respond tonight. 10 minutes. We will tell you when there are 2 minutes remaining. Please go ahead and begin. All right, welcome back, everyone. We are going to now ask you to share what you just talked about. And as I said, we're going to use a round robin, so we're going to go down our list of people and give everyone an opportunity to respond. If you don't want to respond, or if someone has already said the thing that you talked about, it's perfectly fine to indicate that. But we want to give everyone just a chance to tell us a little bit about what you talked about. So we are going to start with Stephanie. Stephanie, if you would unmute your microphone, please. Go ahead, Stephanie.
My apologies for being late.
No, that's fine.
We chatted. It's nice to touch base with the same people every week, because then you can see how things are progressing. So we chatted about the progress that Kate and Julia have made so far in theirs, and they're much farther ahead than Barbara and Charlene and I. We're kind of just starting to think about how we're going to roll it out, and they've done one observation and lots of discussion. So we had an interesting conversation about, and I don't want to steal their thunder, but what they thought they would be observing and what they actually observed, and then how they're going to try and observe or get the results that they're hoping to get from the students.
Great, thank you. We're going to move on to Barbara next. So Barbara, we are unmuting your microphone. If you can do the same thing. Go ahead, Barbara.
I didn't make an asterisk.
Oh no, we're doing the round robin now. So we're going to go down the list. We're just going to ask everyone if they would like to respond. You don't have to respond. We want to give everyone the chance.
This is Karen's turn to respond. Karen, I'm not sure it's Karen or Karen. It's been really, really interesting talking to her. You know, we're again, I guess it's a bit like Charlene saying, not Charlene, Stephanie saying that we're, you know, how are we going to find the time to actually pull three of us out to watch a lesson? And of course, we've been on half-term break. So, you know, I'm glad that you said earlier on that you're behind us and we can ask for this time. But really interesting conversations about the same sort of challenges that we're facing. You know.
Yep. Great, thank you, Barbara. Yeah, time for collaboration is going to be one of the things, and we should maybe plan to talk about creative ways to make time, because there are, with all things, including things like peer coaching, we've had to think really seriously about how we create time for people to do these things. And of course, by choosing lesson study, you're choosing one of the options to peer coaching. So just as the school is prepared to make time for people to do peer coaching, they are committed to making time to do lesson study. But as we said, if you need some additional help with your school figuring out how that works, we are happy to do that. We're going to move on. I'm sorry, go ahead.
We're trying to, Stephanie, Charlene, and I are trying to sort of amalgamate lesson study and peer coaching together, so that it's one sort of thing. So yeah, so it would be nice to talk to you about, you know, how we can get that sorted.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
We're going to open Jane's microphone now.
Jane, you need to unmute yourself, please. Okay.
Go ahead, Jane.
Hi there. I think looking at the Native Language Enrichment Program and doing lesson study and peer coaching with them, obviously one of the challenges is the scheduling because of the different tutors on different days, and also there's not much point in one NLE coordinator spinning her wheels in the dirt in one place where we have two others or three others, you know, across the campuses. So one of our approaches would be grouping NLE coordinators to collaborate on this kind of lesson study, as well as grouping the tutors from the different languages, so all the German tutors together on one day at one of the campuses, working together on it, and then visiting the other to do the actual lesson observation and so on. It's something obviously that we need to bring to heads of school and see if we can get some time for that as well. But it'll be quite exciting to have collaboration on this.
Wow, Jane, that would be remarkable. Yeah. I hope that works. And again, if we can help in any way to support that, just let us know, because that sounds really interesting.
Oh, the email's in the post. Yeah.
All right, thanks. We're going to move on to Karen now. Karen, if you want to unmute your microphone, please.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Go ahead.
All right, can you hear me? Okay, so when I was thinking about the challenges with the development of the research lesson, for my research lesson, I'm looking at building in metacognitive strategies, or kind of those visible thinking practices. And I think that with the teacher that I work with, it might sometimes be difficult to justify that because it's not really tied to our content standards. And so I think I need to work to be able to explain how I think these will benefit the students' learning overall, not just the learning outcomes or the standards for our class, but develop the students' use of metacognitive strategies across subjects.
Yeah. Great, Karen. Thank you for that. Yeah, no, one of the challenges is that oftentimes, a single person has an idea that they would like to use lesson study, and finding those people to collaborate with and identifying those kind of common connections or common concerns, or in sometimes sharing your concern and really trying to find people who share that concern or convincing the other person that it's a valid thing can be really challenging. We are going to move to Kate next, please. So Kate, if you want to unmute your microphone. Hi, Kate. And Kate, I know that you and Julia are together, so maybe we'll do both of you instead of coming back 2 times. We'll start with you.
Actually, Julia's going to go first because she was just saying how she was really she was last.
Okay, that's fine.
So only that we do them in alphabetical order each time, so therefore the questions always go to people with the letters higher up the alphabet.
Thank you for jumping me in it there, Kate.
You're welcome. We are both working on collaboration in science experiments. So even though we work at different grade levels, so last week Kate we made a list of outcomes we thought that the students would show to demonstrate that they were collaborating, and we were trying to get them to collaborate over the making the results table. We saw a lot of collaboration over making the experiment, but very little collaboration over making the results table, but we weren't expecting that. So our list of questions we came up with didn't really match what we saw.
So that was quite a challenge.
So that was interesting, and that was a challenge. And then tomorrow I'm going to observe Kate with a collaborative exercise, and we've got another list of questions, and we'll see how it goes. So the idea is we're getting a bit of baseline data before we then come up with some interventions to try to improve the collaboration. That's our sort of our plan.
That's great, and that's a fantastic approach. And again, the 2 of you are very lucky that, again, because you seem to be in very close agreement about what the challenges you're trying to address. Oftentimes when you're trying to build this collaborative partnership with another teacher, that is really a challenging piece. So, well done to you guys for having gotten past that and beginning now to test some of your ideas.
Yeah, our specific sort of research questions are a little bit different, Ben, but they've basically come down to the same sort of things that we're looking for, which is why we kind of went joined together.
Why we came up with that question, and it's good to have middle school, high school working together as well.
All right, thank you to both of you. We are going to switch over to Amanda now. So Amanda, if you'd like to unmute your microphone. Go ahead, please.
I think one of the things that we talked about in our conversation, Barbara and I, Barbara addressed it earlier of how having very different teaching styles might be a challenge in the collaborative process, and how to sort of accommodate for that in that collaborative lesson planning. I mean, obviously you have the same outcome goals, but different teachers might have very different ways of approaching and getting to that point. So that you have to kind of do some compromising and chatting in that situation. And then, of course, we talked a lot about the time. And one thing that we talked about potentially is that using those, I mean, every campus has a different meeting structure, but having some of those after-school meetings dedicated to professional growth. And so if you're working with a peer coach, you might be meeting, during that time. If you're doing a lesson study, maybe that could be a time to do that, or action research, or whatever different. It might just be a PLC meeting, but that we could maybe have the organization dedicate some of those meeting times to that purpose.
With Karen.
Amanda, thank you very much for that. Again, I know that some of the campuses are beginning to move in that direction. Some of them have already committed some of that time. But certainly, the experiences that all of you have and the feedback that you can give to your division leaders and heads of school in terms of the way that would actually facilitate and enable some of these things that they are presenting as opportunities, which will only truly be opportunities if people have the time to do them. We're going to move on to Richard now. Richard, would you like to unmute your microphone? Hi, Richard. Go ahead.
Well, I was looking over these questions with some trepidation, really, and I looked at this one: what challenges do you anticipate? Now, my aim, of course, is to use lesson study in flipped classroom, and I'd been assuming that my research lesson would be about the lesson that follows the students having done some preparatory work. And I thought, well, the biggest challenge probably is that they won't have done it. and there's already quite a lot about this in the literature on flipped classrooms, about the fact that it really needs a change in the mindset of the students, so they've bought into the whole idea of the flipped classroom. In fact, I forget his name, but we had a man who did a teleconference type thing about peer coaching. He's talking about how you can't expect students to behave in a particular way unless you've changed your own behaviour.
Yeah.
So then I thought, well, probably I'm aiming at the wrong thing, and my research lesson should be more about how am I working on changing their mindset before you actually get to presenting or producing an adequate flipped lesson and response. So maybe I need to change my research question.
Yeah.
That's it, really.
Yeah, Richard, thank you for that. I mean, again, one of the things that you could think about is beginning to, so instead of doing your research lesson on the introduction of the flipped classroom, I think that you're absolutely right that in order to kind of see learning coming from a new teaching approach, you have to really first understand, and the students have to understand how to engage with that teaching approach. And similar, in a way similar to what Julia and Kate are doing, that you might actually think about introducing that whole flipped classroom as, through a series of lessons, and not having the lesson study focus on the very first lesson, but once it's something that the students understand and they get the expectation that they do have to prepare before they come to class, or they can't engage in the learning discussions, that really that would be the time to employ lesson study, because you really want to be able to see the learning that arises from the methodology. And as you said, if they don't engage or if they don't prepare properly, that learning is very, very limited.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much for that. We're going to move on to Denise now. Denise, if you'd like to unmute your microphone. Go ahead, Denise.
Yes, Mary and I had a great conversation regarding something that when she mentioned it, I realized that was a great way of looking at it. In addition to the things we've been talking about with teachers, and I know she's going to say more about this probably after me, but already I'm involved with a project that has daily checkout surveys that students tell us a lot about. So when it talks about collaborative lesson planning, why not include the students in that? And it's a perfect tool that I use because I get to see what students are finding hard in terms of activities for communication, what they're wanting to practice more in order to get better at the language, what they find easy, what they would like to see more of. So, I can see what she means, what Mary means when she says, including the students as part of the collaborative process also will lead to better lesson plans, and that's something that I'm already having the data for. So it's another twist on this collaborative piece.
Great, Denise. Thank you very much for that. A really important point and something to think about is how we actually engage students in this process. And actually, the whole idea of student agency or student voice is an important instructional method, as well as a way to plan lessons. We're going to move to Mary now. Mary, if you'd like to unmute your microphone, please. Thank you, Mary. Go ahead.
Thank you. Yes, just in follow-up to what Denise was saying, I was mentioning how we tend to think of collaboration in terms of with fellow staff, either within the same subject area, same department, or someone outside of the department with good knowledge of technique and resource preparation along the lines of what we're trying to do. And part of the task I'd like to use, again, is visual learning strategies within the sciences to help map the logistics of studying and preparing for studying and getting through practicals and research type projects. So in order to collaborate with staff, I'm trying to develop extra resources that I can run by different people, and they can tell me, this might be more informative if you structure it a little differently. That style of collaboration works well, and then in review as well, how students have done. But I think the majority of the collaborative work from the point of view of the task will be with the students in the classes that I work with. And in that respect, what I'd like to see the students taking part in it is by using different methods towards developing these visual learning tools and feeding back to me on which is working best for them. So for example, the comparison between a list structure or a mind map structure for developing technique and learning. Also the contents of what might go into that and how it works best for individuals, but then how that individual set of results can help me design it in a universal way that may be used for any class later on. The challenges in that sense, students are at the beginning very eager to please, and one of the main challenges is that you may not get the most honest answers from students in pre-assessment quizzes to try and find out where their basic level of learning is before we even start. And then as we go along, maybe finding things more difficult than they originally anticipated. So I think to combat that, I've tried to develop pre-assessment quizzes before new units or new topics with the intention of developing interim quizzes or starter quizzes that reflect some of the answers students give to the pre-assessment quiz. So I'm checking maybe twice or 3 times within a unit how that understanding is developing, and being able to discuss with them at the end of a unit then, as you mentioned, in terms of interviews, should clarify the progress, and that's a really strong student collaboration on the project from me.
Mary, thank you very much for that. I know that we're coming close to the end of time, and there are some people who have 5 o'clock staff buses. Nilu, are we too late for you this afternoon? You may be already running off to catch your bus. Hi, Nilu.
Yeah, hi. I've already missed the bus now, but I was thinking, because it's a very good platform for discussion, and this is the only time we can discuss and ask questions. Maybe if everybody agrees, we could start a little later, so that, you know, maybe at your home, then the discussion can go up to 8 o'clock or something. I don't mind. It's really interesting listening to different people.
Yeah, guys, I mean, certainly one of the things I would encourage you to do is that as you get to know other people who are taking the course and find that there are people who are asking similar research questions, please do carry on these discussions after the course ends. We have tried to frame the timing of the course, taking into consideration our colleagues in Doha who are already joining us quite late into the evening. They're 3 hours ahead of us already, so they're already at that kind of 8 o'clock mark now that we're finishing. We are going to go ahead and close rather quickly here, and I apologize for that. The discussion this afternoon was so rich that I didn't want to cut anyone short. Some weeks, you know, the topic doesn't really resonate so well, and so there's a lot less feedback. Obviously, this week was a week that really kind of touched something and really got people thinking actively about how they might take the lesson study forward. So you did have an optional Learning Log 5.3. I'm going to talk more about that in one of the subsequent sessions, because we may come back. You'll have an option of coming back to that for session 8. So we're not going to do anything with that just now. And again, just in closing, do keep in mind that we have provided Learning Log 5.4 as an option. And tomorrow I will send you out the materials for session 6, along with a link to the recording for session 5. If you want to go back and look at any part of today's session, please do that. Thank you, everyone, for joining tonight. Thank you for all of your contributions. That was a really great session tonight. Have a good week. We'll see you next week online.
Okay, thank you. Bye.